Hey everyone, it's Retro Oddities here. I'm the Fat Wizard, and I'm joined today with...
Shane of the Twitch channel ShaneIsGames.
That's right, and it's Halloween, right? So I figured we ought to play like an oddity, a Halloween oddity. And if you look behind, if you're watching the video, you'll see this amazing background we have created for the show. It's kind of like Silent Hill-esque, which is really cool, Shane. I know you saw the image and you're like, holy crap, that thing's amazing. And
I was very impressed.
yeah, and it's kind of topical because on the Saturday morning gaming show, we actually played Silent Hill 2. So it kind of fits the theme, but it also fits the theme of what we're playing today. Shane, do you want to give us a little announcement of what we're watching right now?
Yes, today we are playing the retro FPS classic Clive Barker's Undying for PC.
I think there was one thing that was factually wrong in that sentence was that you used the term classic. Don't know I'd go that far on this one. It's definitely a retro game, but is it a classic?
Probably not. That was overselling it a little bit, I think. It's good, though. It's good. I liked it anyway.
It's cool. Yeah, I remember my first exposure to this game was... All right, so first of all, this game was released in, let me double check, 2001. So it's like 20 years old. And that would have made me something like... I don't know, 15, 16. I'm just trying to do math real quick in my head. It's 15 or 16 or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't say this. It's kind of more embarrassing than I said I was 15, 16, but this game scared the hell out of me. And I couldn't play it. In fact, I played the demo, and it scared me so bad, I was like, I can't play this game.
Oh, wow.
I don't know what your first exposure to this game here, Shane, was.
I actually played this back in the day, too. Not right as it released, but I remember I bought this as a loose jewel case off the clearance rack at like a Radio Shack or something like that.
Everything checks out with what you just said. So the reason this game scared me, but I think it's one of the reasons I really wanted to go back to it, is it had this really cool mechanic that I don't know they use it as much as I would have liked, but they have this scrying mechanic. So kind of like a real high level, you're this detective and you're good at hunting down paranormal things. And you have this ability to, I guess, look back in time. Is that what's going on there? Or like, I don't know, are you projecting? Or what is he actually doing there?
I don't know. It's kind of like a spooky resonance or something. It's like a haunting, but only a little bit of a haunting that you can only see with this thing, I guess.
Yeah, because I was thinking it was seeing back in time, because one of the levels you go to like a monastery and you like seeing these monks like the ghosts, but when you start out the game, you go into the mansion, and again, what I thought was really cool is some of the pictures, you'll have like a picture of a woman, and then you scry, and it's like a picture of a demon woman, and it just kind of, flips real quickly. It looks really cool. But that's not in the past. That's sort of just like a demonic presence of that photo. So yeah, I don't know what the consistency is on that scrying, but it was pretty cool.
Right. I think the one thing I didn't like about the scrying is the fact that to be able to scry in the game, first of all, you have to have a specific item in your hand. And then you'll hear the game say, oh, you can scry here.
That's not it. That's not true at all.
That's not true.
I thought so. So, okay, you're talking about... You're talking about... you have like this green orb, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's real quick talk about like your left hand is sort of like your mechanical things. So it's like your bang bang shooty type stuff, and then your right hand is all your mysticism. So you got like guns left hand, and then you got your fireballs and lightning bolts on the right hand. The only exception is that little gem. Sure. And I think that gem acts as like an amplifier for your abilities, right?
Right, if you have the gem in your hand, then your magic actually casts as if it was a couple levels higher, I believe.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is when you're in an area that you can scry, it kind of like glows green, right? And you're like, oh, I should use that here. But there's actually another clue. You'll hear a whisper. It says something like, look around, or something like that.
I think sometimes it actually says scry, too, which is a little bit on the nose.
Yeah. So it's kind of creepy, but yeah, because I wanted to use a gun, or or later on I used a scythe, which is amazing. We'll talk about that. But I wanted to use a gun and not have that little gem out all the time. And so I was like, well, it kind of seems like to see the cool stuff in this game, you got to use the gem. And then I tried without it and it's like, oh yeah, you actually get some verbal cues. So
All right,
once I
that's
learned
good
that,
then.
I went through it. So, yeah. And like some of them were really cool. Any of the scrying moments really stick out in your head here, Shane?
I mean, I think the one that always sticks out for me is probably the one that was their showpiece, which was the first time you see that giant painting that shows the entire family that owns the mansion, all standing
Yeah.
side by side. And then you scry, and it shows them all in their like true demon forms, and like the head of the family is literally decapitated.
Yeah.
It's such a cool piece of art, and it's so much more high res than everything around it that it just grabs your attention. I love that.
Yeah, I want to see if I can actually find a photo of this to describe it a little bit. Yeah, so like one of the characters is super gaunt on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, let's see here if I pull up the image. Yeah. So you've got like a pirate dude as well. And then you have a girl that kind of looks like maybe like a non-sexy succubus. I don't know how to describe that. More like a vampire, I guess. And then, like you said, the person in the middle is beheaded, and that is the head of the family, right? Is that Jeremiah? I think his name is.
Yeah, he's the character that's sort of your contact in the game, especially early on. He's the one that invited your character to this whole setting in the first place. Yeah,
and maybe this is a little bit of foreshadowing because ultimately you do behead Jeremiah, right? So
this is true.
Maybe that's kind of foreshadowing. I don't know. But yeah, it's one of these things where when you do the scrying, the image flips over very quickly. So it jumps out at you and it kind of startle you if you're not really sure what you're supposed to be looking at. You know, it's kind of like a jump scare in a way. And then again, back in 20 years ago when graphics looked, you know, when this was the highlight of the graphical era, it was scary. But now you look at it and you're like, yeah, these are really low polygons, right?
It's really hard to explain this, to convey this to somebody that wasn't there, but it's terrifying when this is the highest fidelity thing you've ever seen on your computer before. I think is the best way I could explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember even before I played Alone in the Dark. And that game looks terrible. It's like how do these blocks scare someone? But you know, it's totally scary when that's the like you said, the latest and greatest there.
The high bar, yeah, definitely.
So yeah, again, I kind of came into Clive Barker's Undying with call it 20th century perspective, and it's definitely rough around the edges. At least in the chapter with so one of the first chapters sees you in a monastery, and there's a lot of times where you have to like, all right, well, all these doors are locked. Which, by the way, we're talking about Silent Hill 2. This game has something very similar, and that like almost all the doors are locked, and some of them don't even open. And you're like, oh my gosh,
oh yeah,
are we doing this again? But yeah, did you have any problems at all, like finding the right item or like, you know, figuring out what to do?
There was definitely a couple parts where I got stuck. I ended up looping around. The monastery was one of those because that is a humongous area, and there's a couple spots where you just need to pick up a thing on the floor or find one door that isn't like really out there or something. I found some of the outdoor areas particularly drove me nuts. There's the one part where you're there's a bunch of sort of canyons that end with like a barn area, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, that is in going towards the monastery area.
And there's like a little like hole you need to crawl through or something, and I kept going back and forth through that area trying to figure out where they wanted me to go. And that one's fun because there's infinite enemy spawn, so they just keep throwing werewolves at you until you figure out where you're going.
Yeah, those werewolves are annoying. They'll just do this lunge at you, and I don't know, like there was a certain point where I just finally there was like I was very, very low on health packs, but there became a moment where I almost felt like the designers got swapped in and out. You know, a designer got benched and the other designer came in. They're like, we're putting a health pack every 5 feet now. And I love that because now, you know, I got like 20 health packs now. But yeah, going up into that monastery and the whole thing, I was constantly running out of health packs.
Mm. I feel like the game started really strong. Like, for me, the thing that always sticks with me is all the parts in the mansion.
Mansion's the best part of the game, yeah.
Really cool, really atmospheric, really moody. They've even got some sort of like RPG-like moments where there's no enemies and you're going around talking to people around the mansion and you're getting a little bit of backstory, and that was really cool. I loved those parts of the game.
A lot of fun, yeah. And you have a butler, or maybe it's a groundskeeper. He kind of ferries you around. So the mansion is like your central hub, and then your missions more or less send you away. You go out there for a couple hours and come back to the mansion, and then you unlock another, call it wing of the mansion. And the butler will kind of usher you around. So it was pretty easy to figure out where you're supposed to go next. But the funny thing is, if you kill the butler, just game over. I don't know if you did that at all.
I didn't kill him specifically, but I killed like the maid, and it turns out if there's any of the NPCs you kill, they just game over the heck out of you.
Oh, really?
They still give them a death sequence, but they game over you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that mansion is really strong, and it sounds like gothic atmosphere, I think, pretty well. I wanted to talk really quickly about the different levels, because this kind of reminded me of Eternal Darkness. I don't know if you've played that one.
Oh yes, very much so.
And so it kind of reminds me because you are exploring the story of each of the characters. And so I thought that was really kind of cool. It's like, you know, for the first one, you have the monastery, right? And then you're learning about this scythe that the monks picked up, and it kind of corrupted them. And so you're actually, you even go back in time. And then one of the later chapters, you actually go into like an alternate dimension to explore their story. So I thought that was really cool, and that each of the chapters, if you want to call them that, focuses on a different character and their story. And that's what reminded me of Eternal Darkness, is a sort of like, not always a period shift, but in some situations it was actually a period shift that allowed you to explore something different.
Right. And every area kind of has its own theme, and you know, it's sort of its own mood tied to the eventual boss that you're working your way towards. That was cool, definitely.
Yeah. Now, the enemies and bosses really weren't all that difficult, and especially once you get, I got the haste. I think the haste spell is my MVP. Did you use that one at all?
I never used haste in my playthrough.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you what. You pick up that scythe. So I think it's near the end of the first chapter, the monastery chapter. You get this cool scythe, and if you read the description, it indicates that it maybe actually will heal you up when you're killing people, but I never got any healing benefits from it. Anyway, the scythe is super powerful, and the haste allows you, especially if you upgrade it, allows you to just burn through levels, and just, you know, someone will come up with a gun, and you just like circle strafe around him and hit him with the scythe, and it was pretty fun. But so if you didn't use haste, then what was your MVP spell?
As far as spells, I used Ectoplasm a lot, which is the very first spell you get that you actually obtain in the game. It's the one where you shoot those little balls of light.
I think my experience with Ectoplasm, I also really liked that. That was the first spell that I upgraded to the max. It has a couple drawbacks, though, is that it has kind of a short range for it to be effective, because you kind of think of it as like a shotgun where it has a very wide spread. And so the bolts won't go in a straight line. They kind of veer off in other directions there.
Exactly. The nice thing, though, is once you upgrade it to maximum, because all the spells take mana off of your mana bar. Yeah. Once you upgrade it to maximum, it uses so little mana, you basically never have to worry about running out, which is pretty cool.
You just hold down the fire button, you got yourself a Gatling Ectoplasm.
The only drawback there is you're going to get incredibly sick of that noise that it makes, that little shoots.
Yeah. And I guess we were talking about upgrades there. You could upgrade all your spells, and you do so by getting these little amplifiers, which is pretty cool. So there was a lot of exploration you could do in the levels, little secrets. There's a bunch of different power-ups to collect. So there's like a mana well, which increases your mana. I don't think there's a way to increase your health, or at least I never found any. There is these tattoos, I guess. I don't know if you like wear them or how that works, but that increases your mana regeneration rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get these amplifiers, and the amplifiers are consumable, and you can upgrade any of your spells, which is really cool. But I never really understood, like, why would I want to amplify Scry? Does it last longer, or what?
I think the only argument you could give is that it lasts longer, because they mention in the journal that you have in the game. If you look up Scry there, it actually basically just sort of nudges you and says, hey, by the way, you can use Scry as night vision.
Yeah, and I certainly did that. The game's dark.
It's so dark.
Even if you turn up gamma, it is so dark.
It's so difficult to see in some of those areas.
And one of the things that kind of annoyed me was, I don't want to call them monster closets, because it wasn't quite a closet, but it was more like you'd walk down a hallway and they'd be like, hey, let's spawn some monsters right behind you.
Yes.
Come on, guys, really? And
they'd pull that old Doom 3 trick too, where they spawn an enemy in front of you, and so you start reacting to that, but there's two behind you as well.
That was the most annoying thing in the world. You're like, I'm just gonna curl into a little ball and let you kill me, and then I'll reload.
That's the correct response, I believe.
Now, some interesting history about this game is this originally was going to have a multiplayer, but they decided to actually release the game and patch it later. But if I remember reading right, the sales were pretty weak, and so they scrapped the multiplayer completely.
Correct. They were originally planning to release a couple of console versions as well, but those got scrapped for the low sales as well.
And it's too bad. I guess Clive Barker decided to make one other game later on. Well, not make, but license his name to it.
Correct.
And it was called Jericho. I have no idea if it's a good game or not.
It is not.
Oh, okay. Is it? Give me like the elevator pitch on that one.
Okay, it feels very much like a comic book, but it's really not based on anything exactly. You've got this team of like incredibly goth superheroes who are like some sort of special forces, special ops dudes that fight like the supernatural.
Oh, so Fear. I've played that game.
Yeah, basically, you've been there before.
Yeah.
And they're trying to stop the apocalypse. And you can switch between the team members, and they've each got their own powers. And it just feels very much of its time, because everyone's wearing all black leather. They've all got super pale skin. They're swearing constantly.
Wow, this game sounds like a gem. I didn't. How did this not? Wow. Okay.
Did you read about the original protagonist of Undying as well?
I did, but why don't you walk me through it?
I thought this was cool. So Clive Barker, when he was brought onto the project, I assumed that they already had an outline set up for the game. And their original protagonist for the game was this bald guy covered in tattoos wearing like a fur-lined cloak. There was some sort of
get a bad rep.
Right. And he's like, you know, I would prefer if we had a player character people can relate to. And I don't think anybody can relate to people who's a European count. And they actually created a character model for this guy. So in the opening cinema, you see the actual protagonist of the game in, I think, World War I. He fights this wizard on the battlefield, and you get to see him. And that was supposed to be the guy that you played in the game originally.
Yeah. I think that was probably a good choice. And I will say, I don't know exactly what Clive Barker's role was in here. I'd like to think I don't know if he's a popular writer or like semi-popular. Anyway, as a writer that has written fiction books, I did feel like the journals and stuff were pretty interesting to read and went a step above what I would consider just like a normal, programmer or designer just kind of writing out some lore. It wasn't super deep, but I thought it did well enough to make me kind of interested about what's going on. And especially like, going back to the monastery level, you see these journal bits of finding that scythe, and then kind of like some of the monks are like, well, I need to go away. I don't want to be with this scythe, so I'm going to sneak out of the monastery. And other people are like, hey, this scythe is ruining us all. What do we do? So it's kind of cool to see there's actually like different things going on there. I had a little bit of depth more than just like, hey, evil thing, come down and kill everything.
I think that was the thing for me, is it was just the right amount to help set the mood. And when they would talk about the enemies, you'd be like, oh, that's why these guys look the way they are. That's why this area is set up the way it is. And it just added so much more flavor to what just could have been, well, here's the caves, well, here's the forest. Mm-hmm. I like that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of funny. Why did we get into this whole situation? Like, why is everything haunted? And it's kind of funny. The game here really banks on naive people doing really stupid things, right? That scythe is a good example, but back when people were growing up, like Jeremiah and his family were growing up, they found like a strange journal or something, and they decided to like, I don't know, like recite the journal words in the what do they call them, like the ancient stones or whatever.
Right.
And it's just kind of like, it's just bad ideas all around, but people, that's why we're in this situation. It's just poor decision making by kind of everyone that encounters these paranormal objects.
Like, I understand when there's like a horror movie and they're like, oh, it's the Ring. People find a VHS, they expect them to pop it into their VHS player, something like that. But here, the evil entity is assuming that you'll see weird writing on rocks and think, oh, I should go spend the next several months researching this writing and then perform a ritual. And not only does this work, but it works with children.
I can't get my kids to study their English homework. How are we going to do Latin or whatever it was?
Exactly.
Yeah. But your family does succumb to it. And then Jeremiah, who brings you here, unfortunately, he also kicks the bucket also. He becomes corrupted, because he's basically like, hey, we need to deal with my siblings. I fear I'm going to follow in their footsteps, and you find out what's the big reveal at the end here.
So the big reveal is two-part. Number one, Jeremiah, who's your main character's friend, who sort of summoned you there to help him, is actually evil the whole time, and him summoning you there was... Oh, no! Betrayed!
Okay, well, moving on.
And of course, the other twist when you get to the final boss is the fact that you get your revenge by killing him, and it turns out that's what he wanted anyway, and that's what summons the final boss.
Man, this deity is really playing the long game. But I guess if you're hundreds of thousands of years old, you can kind of make things fun for yourself, right? I guess that might make sense. Is like, hey, if I'm going to be living hundreds of thousands, millions of years, maybe I just make like the way to summon me just like a really amazing Easter egg. And if people find it, then like, boom, that was fun to watch people do that. Or some sort of alternate reality game. I don't know.
You know what it feels like for me? It feels like a hidden camera show. Hey, let's put these arcane runes on this rock, and then let's watch and see what people do.
I mean, have you seen Cabin in the Woods?
Yes, I have.
Okay, there you go. That's it right there.
When it works, I suppose.
So, yeah, I guess Clive Barker, kind of an okay game. It's one of these things that... it was great back in the day, and I think the design leaves a little bit to be desired, and be prepared to use a walkthrough to kind of get yourself out of some of the sticky situations. Because I did find myself kind of like 30 minutes like running around was like, this is incredibly boring. But then when you get to the good stuff, like the exploring the areas and reading the journals, like that's where the game shines. So don't feel
I'm
bad if
curious
you
as
want to
well,
pick
if you
this
don't
up.
mind. I'm curious
Go
as well, if you don't mind me asking, did you have any struggles with any of the bosses? Because I know some of the bosses had gimmicks and I didn't find them super duper intuitive.
I'm trying to think if there were any gimmicks there that really stuck out at me.
I think you might have had the benefit because you were using the scythe, and most of the boss gimmicks were use the scythe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the scythe is so good, except for when enemies would fly, boss enemies would fly. You would just kind of shoot them with your 6-shooter. But yeah, I think the scythe was my MVP. I really, I'm usually not a melee character. I usually don't do melee. I usually like more of like a ranged things, which is why I started with the ectoplasm for a while. But that scythe is just so good. Oh, also, can we talk about death sequences?
Yes.
Oh man, there are so many gems there, but they really taunt you, right?
Yeah, every time you die, whatever enemy killed you get a specific sort of like finisher move on you. And it's both hilarious and a little demoralizing, and I love that they put that in there. Did you have any favorites of those?
I had two. One of the groups of bad guys there, it starts with a T. Do you remember
the Tresanti?
Tresanti. So they have like a cutlass or whatever, and so the pirates, and what they do is they'll more or less stun you, and then they'll come up to you and kind of like twirl around, so you're both facing the same direction. So like you're directly behind them, and then they take their scythe or their cutlass and kind of backstab you in the chest. And they say something like, "Oh, you've got a death wish," or something like that. But the one that stuck out because it's just utter ridiculousness was the casters. I think all the casters are women.
I believe
and so they will come up to you and they'll say something like oddly provocative, like, "Oh, this won't take long." And then they'll like kiss you and then walk around you and stab you. And it's just, it's honestly like 5 seconds of this really protracted moment. And it was like both incredibly sexist and aggravating to watch my guy get kissed over and over and over only to be stabbed.
It's very Mortal Kombat is what it feels like.
It was very Mortal Kombat. What about you? Did you find any that you really enjoyed?
I think my favorite was the pure simplicity of the howlers, the werewolf type things you fight near the beginning of the game. They just bite your entire head off. Is what they do. They just, in one big chomp, bite your entire skull off of the rest of your body. And I laughed every single time I saw that. Because they're not even humongous like werewolf things. I don't know how they could have possibly pulled that off.
They have, what do they call it? Dislocking jaw, whatever.
Dislocatable.
I don't know. It's like the same thing that snakes have.
Yeah.
The big jaws.
Handy thing to have.
Well, I think that's kind of all the things I wanted to chat about. And we can go to our next, the usual question here is, I'm going to set the scene for you.
All right.
Ring, ring.
Hello.
Ring, ring. Hello, is this ShaneIsGames?
Why, yes, speaking.
Shane, do you know who this is?
No idea. Please tell me.
This is Clive Barker.
Oh, goodness.
I've heard that you've got quite the design skills, making a sequel to both Blazing Dragons and Buck Bumble. And it just so happens I'm in the market for a new Clive Barker's Undying 2. But before I give you the job, I want to know, what sort of ideas do you have to make sure my game's a smashing hit?
Oh, thank you for asking. I've actually been thinking about this for a long time, Mr. Barker. I've got it put together.
I don't believe you.
Don't worry, I'm going to sell you on this one. So, The whole point of this game was you had to decapitate all the family members, but it turns out in a plot twist that was what actually opened the portal, right? So,
yes.
For the sequel, what you have to do is you have to make sure that the portal can never be opened again. So obviously, what you have to do is you have to find all of their heads and put them back on their bodies.
Brilliant! My God, I think you've got it!
Thank you.
And instead of calling it Undying, we could call it... Well, I guess you would be undying in that situation, right?
Undying, maybe?
The Undying. I love that idea.
It almost makes sense. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that actually they were planning to do a sequel, apparently, and they actually kind of set up a cliffhanger at the end of the game, too.
Yep.
But again, because the low sales, that never ended up happening.
Very sad. Well, I have good on authority that with that idea and a couple of ShaneIsGames channel points, we can make this happen, right? So Shane,
probably.
Why don't you talk to us about how we can join your channel and both watch you for entertaining content and make this sequel happen?
Of course. So as I mentioned at the start, my name is Shane. I run a Twitch channel called ShaneIsGames. I play the obscure, the unusual, and the nostalgic for your benefit and to save you from having to do it yourself. Also, we have a running gag on the channel where you can spend channel points to help get sequels for games that have never gotten sequels and probably will never and probably should never get sequels as well. So I stream super late at night / early in the morning if you're in the Americas, but feel free to stop by, most definitely.
You know, you say that, but I would 100% go fund me a Harvester sequel.
I'd be there too. I'll have no shame. I love me some weird.
Wow. Okay. And hey, if you like the show here, if you like Retro Oddities or Saturday Morning Gaming Show, we urge you to head on over to SaturdayMorningGamingShow.com. There you can get all of our episodes and all of our links, including our Discord, which we hang out there and talk crazy games on there, whether it be Retro Oddities or, really good games. Unfortunately, we don't invite Shane to play any of the really good games. But that's okay. He likes it that way.
I do, unfortunately.
Also, if you're interested in helping support the show and future endeavors, you can also go to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Gaming Show to learn more about some of the things we got over there. So, I really appreciate everyone watching us and listening to us on the podcast. And that's really all I got to say about Clive Barker's Undying. Any last words from you, Shane?
I think I'm good. It was a pleasure revisiting it, even if it wasn't quite as perfect as I wish it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I will say, actually, last thing about this is, I think this is kind of on the fringe of an oddity, but I really wanted to do something that was Halloween-ish, and I've been meaning to play this game for a while, and I think that Clive Barker's Undying is one of those that a lot of people have heard about, and maybe even played the demo. I think I actually played the demo from a PC Gamer magazine back when they did the demos and anything. But yeah, in any case, I'm sure most people have seen it or heard of it and played the demo, but maybe you haven't picked up the game. You might be worth picking up this Halloween season if you're into something kind of retro and spooky. And with that,
the way I think about games like this is it's a game with a lot of ideas, and not all of them work, but some of them are very cool.
Yeah. Maybe a little long, though.
Yeah.
Maybe I was kind of hoping it was more of like a 10-hour experience. You can probably multiply that by a factor of 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Not a factor, but multiply it by 3 or 4. So. All right, man. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Retro Oddities.